When they find a billionaire unconscious in an emergency stairwell, two homeless boys come to her aid. When she wakes up, she recognizes one of them by a birthmark that stirs old memories. The piercing winter wind whistled between the skyscrapers of the financial district, carrying with it a fine, icy drizzle that lashed the deserted streets below. The sky, already naturally dark at that hour, looked even more threatening, covered by heavy clouds occasionally lit by distant flashes of lightning. Amid this hostile backdrop, two small figures hurried through the storm, searching for shelter. "Faster, David," whispered the taller of the two, his childish voice nearly drowned by the howling wind. "See that big building over there? We can always get in around the back." John, only 6 years old, held his younger brother's hand tightly. Though small, his fingers maintained a protective grip that was already second nature to both of them. David, who had just turned 5, tried to keep up, trusting John as he always had, even before they escaped the orphanage. Their soaked shoes made squishy sounds against the asphalt, blending with the rain and the distant rumble of thunder. Their clothes, far too large for their thin bodies, dripped constantly, leaving a trail of tiny puddles that soon merged with the rainwater. "John," David called, his voice trembling as much from fear as from cold. "My hands are numb." The older boy immediately stopped, taking off his own wet jacket and wrapping it around his younger brother's hands. It was a gesture he repeated frequently. David first, always David first. He'd done it ever since he could remember, from the earliest memories with their mother, and especially since they'd fled the orphanage 3 months ago. The commercial building finally loomed before them, an imposing structure of steel and glass that, out by day, housed offices of important companies but turned into a sleeping giant by night. For the boys, it was more than that. It was a safe haven on the harshest nights, like this one. John knew the building's routine well. He knew that the main security guard made his rounds on the ground floor every 2 hours, and that the service entrance, poorly lit and partially hidden by a large dumpster, was often left unlocked. It was one of many secrets he had gathered during his weeks on the streets, precious knowledge that kept him and his brother alive and relatively safe. Carefully, he guided David to the back door. As he expected, it gave way with a gentle push. The inside of the building was noticeably warmer, and the faint smell of cleaning products still lingered in the air, mixed with the stale scent of old coffee coming from the employees' break room. "Take your shoes off," John instructed, already removing his own. "If we walk around in wet shoes, we'll leave footprints and they'll know we're sneaking in." David obeyed without hesitation, his little fingers struggling with the soaked shoelaces. John knelt down to help him, as he did every night. It was in these moments that he missed their mother the most, small everyday gestures she used to handle, which he now tried to replicate for David, even though his own hands were still so small and clumsy. "There's that nice corner on the 3rd floor. Remember?" John said as he tucked the wet shoes into his worn backpack. "It's colder tonight, so let's go up right away." The brothers headed for the emergency stairs, their usual path. The elevator was out of the question. Too risky, too loud, too easy to get trapped or caught. John had memorized which steps creaked and avoided them carefully, while David, right behind him, copied every movement meticulously. It was between the 2nd and 3rd floors that their lives changed forever. At first, it looked like just another shadow among many cast by the faint lighting on the walls, but a particularly bright flash of lightning illuminated the area through the stairwell window, revealing a figure lying on the landing. It was an elegantly dressed woman, unconscious, her breathing so soft it was barely noticeable. John's instinct was to back away, pulling David with him. Years in the orphanage and months on the streets had taught him that adults usually meant trouble. But something kept him from immediately running. Maybe it was the woman's serene face, framed by perfectly styled grey hair, or the sapphire brooch fastening her silk scarf, a jewel that triggered a vague sense of familiarity in his memory, like the distant echo of a long-forgotten melody. "John," David whispered, clutching his brother's sleeve. She's dead." The younger boy's concern was palpable. David still had nightmares about the fire, about their mother being rushed away in an ambulance. John swallowed hard, trying to appear braver than he felt. "No, look," he replied, discreetly pointing. "Her chest is moving up and down. She's just passed out." The woman lay on her side as though she had slid down to a sitting position. Her fine wool coat, visibly expensive, was slightly rumpled, and a designer handbag lay a few inches beyond her reach. Everything about her attire, from the pearls around her neck to her brand-name shoes, screamed wealth and refinement, making her presence on a service stairway all the more intriguing. "We need to help," John said, surprising not only David but also himself. It went against every rule he had set for his survival. Rule number 1, avoid adults at all costs. Rule number 2, never draw attention. Rule number 3, if in doubt, run. But something about this woman evoked a different feeling, almost as if he already knew her from somewhere. David, who trusted his brother's judgment more than anything in the world, moved closer as well. Together, they watched the stranger's gentle breathing, their small hearts torn between fear and concern. As if responding to their silent worries, the woman began to stir. Her eyes opened slowly, revealing irises of a deep blue that initially seemed unfocused, confused. "Where?" She tried to speak, her voice hoarse. "Ma'am, are you okay?" John asked, keeping a cautious distance but showing genuine concern. "Do you want us to call someone?" Elizabeth Smith, though the boys did not know her name yet, blinked a few times, trying to focus. For a moment, she thought she was hallucinating from the fainting spell. Before her stood 2 children, who looked as though they'd stepped straight out of a Charles Dickens novel. Clothing far too large and worn, dirty faces but with intensely bright, curious eyes. I think I slipped," she murmured, trying to sit up. The elevator was broken and, seeing her trying to rise, John instinctively reached out his hand to help. At that very moment, fate revealed its most surprising twist. The fluorescent light in the stairwell, weak and flickering until then, seemed to surge for an instant. Elizabeth, holding out her small rescuer's hand, froze. There, on the boy's thin wrist, was a half-moon birthmark against his pale skin, exactly the same as her daughter Sarah's. Time seemed to stop. Elizabeth felt her heart pound so hard that for a moment she feared she might faint again. The mark was identical in every detail, right down to the slightly irregular top curve. It was a mark she knew intimately, one she had kissed countless times when Sarah was little, calling it the moon smile on her skin. Sarah, her only daughter, who had left 10 years ago after a terrible argument. Sarah, who had been pregnant and hurt, who swore never to return. Sarah, her greatest love and deepest regret, whose whereabouts she had been searching for ever since. "Are you feeling ill again, ma'am?" David's worried voice brought her back to reality. Elizabeth realized she had been silent for too long, still holding John's hand, which he now regarded with a mix of concern and suspicion. She forced herself to release his wrist gently, afraid of scaring him. No, I'm fine," she managed, her voice steadier. "Just a bit dizzy still. Do you live around here?" The brothers exchanged quick glances. A silent communication Elizabeth recognized immediately. It was the same look she and Sarah used to share, that mutual understanding that needed no words. John, clearly the protector, took a small step in front of David. "We're just hiding from the rain," he answered cautiously. Elizabeth studied them more closely now. Their soaked clothes, their worn-out shoes, their thin but beautiful faces. The younger boy, David, had exactly the same eye shape as Sarah, that dreamy gaze she'd had as a child. And John, it wasn't just the birthmark. He looked like a younger, male version of her daughter, the same delicate features, the same determined chin, even the slight furrow of his brow when he was worried. Her mother's heart, and possibly grandmother's, longed to embrace them right there, never to let them out of her sight again. But decades of social life and philanthropic work had taught her the importance of patience and tact. These children were clearly scared and mistrustful, like little wild animals ready to flee at the slightest threat. "It's terribly cold tonight," she remarked gently, as though offhand. "And you're both soaked. I live nearby and I have hot chocolate at home. Would you like to warm up a bit?" Again, that exchange of looks between the brothers. Elizabeth held her breath, fearing they would vanish before she could learn more about their stories. If these boys were who she suspected, and her heart no longer doubted, she couldn't risk losing them. "We don't go anywhere with strangers," John stated firmly, though his voice shook when a shiver ran through him. Elizabeth noticed that both boys were now visibly trembling, their lips slightly purple with cold. David tried to hide how badly he was shaking, copying his brother's strong posture, but his tiny teeth chattered involuntarily. "Of course, yeah, you're absolutely right," Elizabeth smiled kindly. "How about we introduce ourselves then? I'm Elizabeth Smith, and I work to help children. That building over there," she pointed through the window to a large structure across the street, "is my foundation's headquarters." The boys looked in the indicated direction. John knew that building. There were sometimes food distributions there, and he often watched from a distance, wanting to approach, but always fearful he would be recognized and sent back to the orphanage. A particularly loud thunderclap startled David, and he clung to his brother's wet sleeve. Elizabeth's heart ached even more at the sight. They were just babies, really, facing a huge, frightening world alone. "I promise you can leave whenever you like," she added gently. "I just want to make sure you won't get sick out in this rain. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I think I have some chocolate chip cookies too." John looked at his younger brother, then at the rain beating against the window, and finally back at Elizabeth. Something about her felt oddly familiar, like a distant memory of a pleasant dream. Plus, his protective instincts told him David badly needed someplace warm and dry. "Do you promise?" he asked seriously. "Promise we can leave if we want to?" "I solemnly promise," Elizabeth replied, placing a hand over her heart in a gesture that made David smile shyly. "All right then," John finally agreed. "But we'll leave if we feel like it." Elizabeth nodded, feeling her heart warm with hope. As she carefully rose, holding onto the banister, her mind was already racing through the next steps. She needed to earn these boys' trust, learn their story, confirm her suspicions, and most importantly, she needed to find Sarah. The rain kept falling outside, but now it sounded different. No longer threatening, but like a soft lullaby cradling destiny, bringing 3 generations together in an emergency stairwell on a night that would change their lives forever. "My house is just 2 blocks from here," Elizabeth explained, taking a business card from her handbag and showing it to the boys. The gates of the Smith mansion opened silently, revealing a property that looked like it came straight out of a fairy tale. The driver Elizabeth had discreetly called parked the car near the main entrance. Throughout the short 2-block ride, the boys remained quiet, clinging to each other on the leather seat, as if afraid any sudden movement would break the magic of the moment. "We're here," Elizabeth announced softly, watching the children's reactions. John and David stepped out of the car with careful reverence, eyes wide at the imposing building before them. The mansion, with its classic columns and tall windows, was partially lit, creating a welcoming backdrop against the still stormy sky. "Let's go inside," Elizabeth guided them gently. "You must be freezing in those wet clothes." Crossing the main door, the contrast between the boys and the environment became even more obvious. Their bare feet, Elizabeth had insisted they leave their soaked shoes in the car, barely dared to touch the Italian marble floor. The foyer, with its crystal chandelier and Venetian mirrors, reflected golden light in 1,000 directions. "Susan!" Elizabeth called out, and a middle-aged housekeeper appeared almost instantly. "Please prepare a hot bath and find some dry clothes for our young guests." Susan looked briefly at the boys, something indecipherable passing through her eyes, then nodded and went upstairs. John noticed the look and instinctively positioned himself in front of David, a protective gesture not lost on Elizabeth. "Come with me," she said, leading them through the mansion. "Let's get you warmed up first." The brothers walked as if in a museum, keeping a safe distance from every precious object they passed. Their eyes, however, took in every detail: paintings on the walls, sculptures on pedestals, fresh flower arrangements in vases that seemed bigger than they were. In the living room, a fire crackled in the fireplace, creating a cozy atmosphere. Elizabeth noticed how the boys, despite their obvious discomfort with the luxurious surroundings, carried themselves with a natural grace. Something in their movements, in the way they held themselves, hinted at a refined upbringing before life on the streets. Please, take a seat. She indicated a sofa near the fire. I'll have some hot chocolate and something to eat brought in. While she gave instructions to another staff member, the boys perched on the edge of the sofa, trying to take up as little space as possible. Their eyes kept wandering around until something completely captured their attention. Through the partially open double doors, they could see part of the music room, and there, majestic and gleaming under soft light, stood a black Steinway grand piano. Elizabeth noticed the exact moment they spotted it, how their bodies tensed slightly, how their eyes locked onto the instrument. Then, almost in a whisper, John let slip the words that confirmed all her suspicions. "Mom used to play it for us to sleep." David immediately grabbed his brother's hand, as though that shared memory was too precious to say aloud. Elizabeth felt her heart tighten. How many nights had she played for Sarah on that very piano, helping her drift off to sleep? "Would you like to see it up close?" she offered gently. The boys hesitated, but the pull was too strong. Cautiously, they got up and followed Elizabeth into the music room. The space was special, its walls lined with fine wood for perfect acoustics, large windows letting in plenty of natural light during the day. John approached the piano as if it was something sacred. His small hands hovered over the keys without pressing them, but his fingers moved slightly in the air, as though remembering a melody. "You can play if you want," Elizabeth encouraged, sitting in a nearby armchair. David was the first to dare, pressing a single key with his tiny finger. The crystal-clear note echoed through the room, making him smile. Encouraged by his brother's reaction, John touched another key, and soon both were experimenting with different notes, creating a disjointed melody that was still packed with meaning for them. Elizabeth watched with her heart overflowing with conflicting emotions. There were her grandsons, she was certain now, discovering the same piano where their mother once learned to play. The same Sarah she had lost because of her pride and inflexibility. The memory of that last argument still haunted her. Sarah, at 22, trying to explain that she wanted to follow her own path, to teach music in social programs rather than pursue the concert career Elizabeth had planned for her. The harsh words exchanged, the ultimatum given in a moment of anger, the door slamming. If only she could turn back time. If only she had been more understanding, more open to her daughter's dreams. Maybe Sarah would never have left. Maybe these boys would have grown up here, in this house surrounded by love and comfort instead of... Her thoughts were interrupted by Susan, returning with hot chocolate and a tray of freshly baked cookies. The sweet aroma drew the boys back to the present, reminding them of how long it had been since their last proper meal. "Come," Elizabeth called, pointing to a small round table where the tray had been placed. "Let's warm up." While the boys ate, displaying surprisingly good manners despite their obvious hunger, Elizabeth watched them closely. John held his cup in exactly the same delicate and precise way Sarah used to. David had the same habit of blowing gently on his hot drink in small rhythmic puffs. Susan entered again, informing them that the bath was ready and the clothes had been laid out. Elizabeth noticed how anxious the housekeeper looked, her eyes constantly returning to the children as though wanting to say something. "Let's get you ready for bed," Elizabeth announced. "It's late and you must be exhausted." Upstairs, after the hot bath and now dressed in soft pajamas that had once belonged to Sarah as a child, the boys seemed to fight off sleep. Elizabeth guided them to a guest room where 2 beds had been prepared. "You can sleep peacefully here," she assured them, adjusting their covers. "You're safe." But as soon as she turned to leave, the brothers pulled their blankets together and settled onto the same bed, as they were obviously accustomed to doing. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears at this display of mutual love and protection. Back in her own suite, Elizabeth finally let herself process all the events of that extraordinary night. She took an old photograph of Sarah as a child, playing the piano at her first recital, the same elegant posture as John, the same dreamy smile as David. Her grandsons were there after all that time, brought to her by fate through a series of improbable coincidences. But where was Sarah? What had happened to her daughter so that these children ended up on the streets? Gazing out the window, the rain still fell outside, but something inside the Smith mansion had changed forever. In the quiet of the night, Elizabeth made a silent promise. This time, everything would be different. This time, love would be stronger than pride. Somewhere in the city, her daughter waited to be found. And Elizabeth would not rest until her family was whole again. The morning after the boy's arrival, Elizabeth woke before sunrise. In truth, she had barely slept, her mind endlessly revisiting every detail of the previous night. John's birthmark identical to Sarah's, David's sweet smile, the gestures and glances also reminiscent of her missing daughter. In her private study on the mansion's first floor, she opened a drawer she seldom visited. There, carefully organized in chronological order, were all the clues she had collected about Sarah over the past 10 years. Newspaper clippings mentioning young piano teachers, blurry photos of women who resembled her daughter, investigator reports that always ended in dead ends. With trembling hands, she picked up one photo in particular, the last she had of Sarah, taken just weeks before that terrible argument. In it, her daughter smiled at the piano, her wrist clearly displaying the half-moon birthmark that had fascinated her as a child. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her look up. Susan, the housekeeper, passed by the slightly open door in a hurry, casting a nervous glance inside before moving on. This was the third time that morning she had done so. Elizabeth frowned, thoughtful. Susan had been with the family for over 25 years. She had practically raised Sarah alongside her, becoming more of a friend than an employee. After Sarah's disappearance, she was one of the few who stayed, offering silent support in the darkest moments. But since the boy's arrival, her behavior had been off. Steeling herself, Elizabeth picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. "Robert, it's Elizabeth Smith. I know it's early, sis, but I need you here right away. It's about Sarah." Robert Thompson was more than a private investigator. After a decade of searching for Sarah, he had become almost like family. In less than an hour, he was already in the study, his usual grey suit neatly pressed, contrasting with the dark circles under his eyes that indicated he, too, had lost sleep. "Tell me everything," he prompted, opening his ever-present notepad. Elizabeth recounted every detail of the previous night, her voice trembling as she described John's birthmark. She mentioned the physical resemblances, the identical gestures to Sarah's, the boy's natural talent for music. When she reached the part about the fire and the orphanage, Thompson raised his eyebrows with renewed interest. "I'll need recent photos of the boys," he requested, jotting down notes. "I've already taken care of it." Elizabeth handed over 2 envelopes. "And this is the last photo I have of Sarah. Robert," she hesitated, "utmost discretion. So I don't want to frighten them." The investigator nodded, placing the envelopes in his briefcase. "I'll make this my top priority. I'll start with the orphanage. Given the approximate date and the boys' names, it shouldn't be hard to locate the records. And there's one more thing," Elizabeth added quietly. "Susan, she's been acting strangely since the boys arrived. Almost as if she knows something," Thompson finished her sentence, making another note. "I'll assign someone to keep an eye on her discreetly." The following days were agonizing for Elizabeth. The boys gradually adjusted to the mansion's routine, still cautious but visibly more at ease. John remained protective of his younger brother, yet now allowed David to explore the garden under his watchful eye. Susan, on the other hand, grew increasingly nervous. Elizabeth often caught her standing in hallways, watching the boys with an unreadable expression. When questioned, she always found an excuse to slip away quickly. More than once, Elizabeth thought she caught Susan quietly crying. On the 5th night after the boys' arrival, Thompson finally returned. Elizabeth received him in her study after the children had gone to bed, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it. "What did you find?" she blurted, barely waiting for him to sit. Thompson opened his briefcase with deliberate slowness. "We found records from St. Francis Orphanage. John and David Miller were admitted exactly 8 months ago, after a fire in a home located in the Cultural District." Elizabeth felt her legs weaken. The Cultural District, exactly where Sarah had always dreamed of working with music. "The mother," Thompson continued, consulting his notes, "is listed as Sarah Miller." "Miller," Elizabeth whispered. "My mother's maiden name." "Exactly." Sarah was hospitalized in critical condition after the fire, mainly from smoke inhalation and some burns. She was admitted to Central Hospital, but then, at that moment, a noise at the door interrupted him. Susan stood there, paler than usual, holding a tray of tea that was visibly shaking in her hands. "Forgive me," she mumbled. "I thought you might like some tea." Elizabeth noticed how especially nervous the housekeeper seemed upon hearing mention of hospital records. Her eyes avoided direct contact, and her hands trembled so much she could barely set the tray on a side table. Once Susan had left, Thompson lowered his voice again. "There's something else, Elizabeth. The initial fire report. There are inconsistencies. The fire started in more than one spot at the same time, and they found traces of an accelerant." Elizabeth felt her blood run cold. "You mean—" "Yes. It wasn't an accident. And there's more. I assigned someone to check Central Hospital. Elizabeth—" He hesitated. "We found a patient." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Elizabeth gripped the table, her legs suddenly weak. "On the 6th floor of Central Hospital," Thompson went on gently, "there's a patient in a coma admitted 8 months ago. She was brought in the night of the fire, without ID, identified only as Sarah M. Pond in the records. She's... Elizabeth could barely form the words. "Alive, stable, but she hasn't regained consciousness since the fire. And Elizabeth, she has a half-moon birthmark on her right wrist." It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Elizabeth stumbled into a chair, silent tears streaming down her face. Her Sarah was alive, only a few miles away, asleep in a deep coma while her children, by some miracle, had found their way back home. How did we not find her sooner?" she managed to ask after a few moments. Thompson frowned. "That's where it gets even stranger. The original admission records disappeared. Her transfer to the 6th floor isn't in any system. It's like someone deliberately tried to make it difficult for anyone to find her." Outside the study, half hidden by the shadows of the hallway, Susan listened to every word, clutching a yellowed envelope to her chest. Silent tears ran down her aged face as she slipped away quietly, her steps echoing almost spectrally through the mansion corridors. Elizabeth rose abruptly. "I need to see her. Now." "It's late," Thompson cautioned. "Visiting hours—" "I don't care," she interrupted. "I've waited 10 years, Robert. 10 years searching for my daughter. I won't wait another minute." Thompson nodded in understanding. "I've arranged everything. Dr. James, the head neurologist, is expecting us. But Elizabeth—" He hesitated. "The boys." Elizabeth paused, her hand on the doorknob. He was right. She couldn't just leave John and David after finally finding them. "Susan," she called, her voice echoing through the mansion. The housekeeper appeared almost at once, as though she had been waiting for the summons. Her eyes were red, but her posture was firm. "I need to go out," Elizabeth explained. "It's urgent. Please look after the boys. If they wake—" "They'll be safe with me," Susan promised, her voice trembling slightly. "They always have been." Something about the way she said those words made Elizabeth hesitate, but there was no time for questions now. In 15 minutes, she was in the car with Thompson, driving through the city's deserted streets toward Central Hospital. Dr. James awaited them at the entrance to the 6th floor, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a grave expression. "This way," he said, leading them down quiet corridors. "Room 612. A simple sign read, "Patient Sarah M." Elizabeth stopped at the door, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Through the glass, she could see a still figure in the bed, partially covered by white sheets. "She's stable," Dr. James explained softly. "All her vital signs are good. She just hasn't woken up." With hesitant steps, Elizabeth entered the room. Each step felt like an eternity, until finally, she stood beside the bed. There lay Sarah, sleeping a deep sleep, connected to monitors that beeped softly, measuring her heartbeat. Her hair was shorter than the last time Elizabeth had seen her, and there were small burn scars on her neck and arm. But it was undeniably her Sarah, her little girl. With trembling hands, Elizabeth gently lifted her daughter's right wrist. And there it was, the half-moon birthmark, exactly like John's. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, tears now flowing freely. "What did they do to you, my daughter?" Thompson and Dr. James stayed by the door, giving her privacy in this intensely personal moment. After a few minutes' however, the investigator approached kindly. "Elizabeth," he said softly, "there's something I need to show you." Reluctant to leave Sarah's side, Elizabeth followed Thompson to a small storage area nearby. In a box labeled with the room number were the belongings Sarah had carried the night of the fire: a partially burned purse, a few simple pieces of jewelry, and this was in the pocket of her coat, Thompson said, handing over a scorched piece of paper. It was a recital program. The photo showed Sarah smiling at a piano, surrounded by smiling children. The title read, "Benefit Recital, Music for All Project." The date, exactly the day of the fire. She was doing exactly what she always wanted, Elizabeth murmured, running her fingers over the picture. Teaching music to underprivileged kids. "There's more," Thompson pointed to the end of the program. "Look at the featured students' names." Elizabeth felt her heart stop as she read, "Special Solo by John Miller, age 6, accompanied by his brother David Miller, age 5, in the children's choir." The realization hit her like lightning. The fire happened on the night of the recital. Sarah was performing with her children when someone deliberately started the blaze. But why? Who would want to hurt her daughter? As if answering her silent questions, her phone vibrated with a message. It was a photo sent by one of Thompson's assistants who was keeping watch at the mansion. Susan, seated in her room, crying as she looked through an old notebook. Next to her lay several photographs showing Sarah with the boys as babies. "Robert," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling, "I think I know who might have some answers." The night was only beginning, and the most shocking revelations were yet to come. In her hospital room, Sarah remained in her deep sleep, unaware that her sons, by some miracle, had found their way home. And in the Smith mansion, a housekeeper tormented by guilt was finally preparing to reveal a decade-old secret. The truth, like a river long held back by a dam, was about to overflow. The sun had barely risen when Elizabeth entered Central Hospital again, accompanied by Thompson. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying every moment from the previous evening. John's birthmark identical to Sarah's, David's innocent eyes, the knowledge that Sarah lay here, alive yet asleep. Dr. James awaited them in the lobby, as arranged. "Good morning, Mrs. Smith. I've prepared everything you requested. We can spend as much time as necessary with the patient." The elevator ride up to the 6th floor felt agonizingly slow. Elizabeth clutched her purse so tightly, her fingers turned white. Inside it, she carried the last photo she had of Sarah, the same one showing the birthmark clearly. The hallway in the long-term coma unit was quiet, broken only by the soft sounds of medical equipment and the occasional footsteps of the nursing staff. Room 612, the simple sign reading Sarah M., seemed to shout at Elizabeth. "Before we go in," Dr. James paused by the door, his voice gentle yet professional. "I need to prepare you." Sarah suffered moderate burns, mostly on the left side of her body. While most have healed well, there are still visible scars. The important thing is that her vital organs were not severely affected. Elizabeth nodded mechanically, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the doctor's words. Through the door's small window, she could see the motionless figure in the bed, partially covered by white sheets. Stepping into the room, time seemed to stand still. There she was, connected to monitors tracking her heartbeat with soft, steady beeps. Sarah, with shorter hair and a few scars visible on her neck and arm, but still unmistakably her daughter. "Sarah," Elizabeth whispered, moving closer on unsteady legs. "Oh, my daughter." With trembling hands, she took Sarah's right wrist, gently turning it over. The half-moon birthmark, identical to John's, was there, confirming what her heart already knew. "Her vital signs are excellent," Dr. James said gently. "It's a deep coma, but stable. Her brain shows normal activity. She simply hasn't woken up." How long before she wakes up?" Elizabeth asked, never taking her eyes off her daughter's face. "We can't say for sure. Every case is different. But there is something interesting. Over the past few weeks, we've noticed spikes in brain activity whenever music is played in her room. The night nurse sometimes leaves the radio on, and we see Sarah responding positively on the monitors." Elizabeth smiled through her tears. Of course, music had always been Sarah's first language. "We brought her belongings from storage," Thompson interjected softly, setting a box on the small table beside the bed. "I thought you'd like to see them." With great care, Elizabeth began to sift through the items. A partially burned purse held some singed sheet music, a small makeup pouch, some keys, and a diary. The leather cover bore smoke stains but was still legible. "Sarah Miller's Diary, 2024. "I'll leave you alone," Dr. James offered discreetly. "I'll be in my office if you need anything." Thompson also left, closing the door quietly. Elizabeth pulled a chair next to the bed, holding Sarah's limp hand in hers while opening the diary with the other. The first pages were intact, protected by the thick cover. Sarah's familiar handwriting, slightly slanted like Elizabeth's own, began with a January entry. "Dear Diary, today, John had his first formal piano lesson. Of course, he's been playing around with the instrument since he was a baby. How could he not, when his mother is a piano teacher? But today was different. He sat very seriously at the piano, his small hands placed exactly as I taught him, and he played his first full scale without a single mistake. David, not wanting to be left behind, insisted on trying too. He's still so little he can barely reach all the keys, but his musical ear is incredible. He can sing perfectly any melody he hears. Moments like these make me think of Mom, how she'd love to see her grandsons at the piano, but my pride still keeps me from going back. After everything I said, after how I left, how do I tell her she was right about some things? That life isn't as simple as I believed when I was 22? Elizabeth had to stop for a moment, tears blurring her vision. How many times had she dreamed of seeing Sarah again, telling her none of that mattered anymore, that she just wanted her daughter back? Turning a few pages, she found a March entry, just 2 weeks before the fire. "The benefit recital is taking all my time. John will play his first solo, Moon Song, the same piece Mom taught me when I was his age. He practices tirelessly, determined to get it perfect. David will join the children's choir. His angelic voice stands out among the other kids. Sometimes I imagine Mom in the audience. Would she approve of the life I've chosen? I'm not a famous concert pianist like she dreamed, but I've built something meaningful here. My classes at the community project have already changed so many lives. And my boys, oh, my boys are my greatest achievement. John is so much like her, his determination, his posture at the piano, even that little frown when things don't go as planned. David inherited her sweetness, that smile that lights up the room. How can two brothers be so different yet so complementary?" The following pages were partially destroyed by fire, though some passages remained. "Something strange is happening at the conservatory. Susan showed up today after so long, warned me about it, but I can't cancel the recital now. The kids..." Elizabeth's heart raced. Susan. Her Susan had found Sarah before the fire. The last entry, dated the day of the fire, was almost entirely preserved. "Today is the big day of the recital. John is nervous but determined. Last night, I found him practicing alone in the music room by lamplight. When I asked why he wasn't asleep, he said, 'I want Grandma Elizabeth to be proud even if she isn't here.' I held him as I cried, unable to explain how proud she'd be just knowing he exists, how much she'd love to meet him and David. Maybe after the recital I'll finally find the courage. Maybe it's time to go home. P.S. Susan is right. Something is wrong." That man appeared again, asking questions about Mom. "I need to speak to her after the recital. Tell her everything I've discovered about..." The rest of the page was burned, the words lost forever in the flames that nearly took Sarah's life. Elizabeth looked up at her daughter, 1,000 questions swirling in her mind. Who was this man? What had Sarah discovered? And above all, what role had Susan played in all of it? As though answering her thoughts, Elizabeth's phone buzzed with a message from Thompson. "Found something about Susan. You need to see this immediately." At that moment, one of the monitors showed a change. The doctor had mentioned Sarah responded to music. With trembling hands, Elizabeth began to softly hum Moon Song, the same lullaby she had taught Sarah, which Sarah in turn had taught her sons. The monitors showed increased activity. A single tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. "You can hear me, can't you?" Elizabeth whispered, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You've always been able to hear me through the music." Carefully placing the diary in her purse, Elizabeth prepared to leave. She needed to return to the boys, and most of all, she needed to find out what Susan knew. But first, she leaned forward to kiss Sarah's forehead. "I'll find out what happened, my child, and I'll bring your boys to see you. They're so beautiful, so special. You've done an amazing job raising them." In her bed, Sarah remained still, but the monitors continued registering heightened activity. Somewhere within that deep sleep, she was listening, and perhaps, just perhaps, she was finally ready to awaken. Elizabeth left the room with determined steps, clutching Sarah's diary in her bag as though it were a precious treasure. She now had a new purpose: to uncover the truth about the fire, about Susan's involvement, about the mysterious man who had frightened Sarah. Her daughter had planned to return home after the recital. Someone tried to stop her in the worst possible way, and Elizabeth would not rest until she found out who and why. Meanwhile, back at the Smith mansion, two little brothers awoke to another day, unaware that their mother was alive, sleeping a deep sleep just a few miles away. And in her room at the back of the house, Susan clutched a yellowed envelope, her hands shaking as she gathered the courage to reveal a secret hidden for 10 long years. The truth, like a complex symphony, was about to reach its crescendo. Elizabeth returned to the mansion with a heavy heart, Sarah's diary safely tucked in her purse like a precious keepsake. The drive from the hospital felt longer than usual, each second filled with the image of her daughter, lying in that hospital bed, motionless, attached to so many machines. When she arrived, she found John and David in the music room. They were seated at the piano bench, simply gazing at the keys without playing them. It was as if the instrument drew them in with a magnetic pull, even when they weren't touching it. "Good morning," she said quietly, trying to keep the emotion out of her voice. The brothers turned in unison. John, always protective, studied her face as if searching for signs that something was wrong. David, more open with his feelings, ran to her and hugged her legs. "For you disappeared," he said, his small voice filled with worry. We thought you'd abandoned us," John finished from the piano bench, his green eyes, so much like Sarah's, fixed on her. Elizabeth felt her heart clench. Of course they would think that. After everything they'd been through, any unexplained absence must trigger deep fears. "Never," she replied firmly, sitting on the sofa and inviting the boys to join her. "I will never abandon you." After a moment of hesitation, John climbed off the piano bench and sat beside her. David immediately settled in between them, as he always did. "Would you like to tell me about your mother?" Elizabeth asked gently, her heart pounding. The brothers exchanged glances again. That silent conversation only they understood. John spoke first. "She played piano every night to help us sleep," he said, his voice quiet, even when she was really tired from teaching all day. "It was always the same song," David added, brightening at the memory. "That one about the moon." "Moon song," John corrected. "Mom said she learned it from her grandmother when she was little." Elizabeth fought back tears. It was the same piece she had taught Sarah when Sarah was only 6, John's current age. "Our house was small," John went on, gaining confidence, "but we had an old piano Mom loved. She'd teach lessons there during the day to kids in the neighborhood. Some couldn't pay, but she taught them anyway. And on weekends," David chimed in excitedly, "we'd go to the conservatory. It was a big place with lots of pianos. Mom taught there too, and we got to play with the other kids." "That's where the fire happened," John said, his voice growing serious again. "It was recital night. I was going to play my first solo." Elizabeth held her breath, her heart aching at the pain in her grandson's eyes. "Everything was so beautiful," David whispered. "Mom bought us new clothes, and there were so many people in the audience." "I was nervous," John admitted. "But Mom said to imagine I was just playing at home, just for her and David." And then David shrank against Elizabeth. "Then the fire started," John finished, instinctively moving closer to his brother. "It spread so fast, Mom carried us out. But there was so much smoke." Elizabeth wrapped her arms around them, feeling their small bodies tremble with the memory. We only remember waking up in the hospital, John continued after a pause. The doctors said Mom was sleeping, that she needed rest. Then the social workers came. They wanted to separate us, David burst out, grabbing John's hand. At the orphanage, we heard them say it'd be easier to find families if they split us up. I promised Mom I'd always take care of David, John said with surprising conviction for a 6-year-old. So we ran away. Better to live on the street together than split up in different homes. Elizabeth's heart broke and swelled with pride at the same time. That fierce determination, that loyalty, it was so much like Sarah, who never gave up when she believed in something. Our first night on the streets was the scariest, John continued, but I remembered Mom saying music calms the heart, so I sang Moon Song to help David sleep. John sings just like her, David said proudly. Elizabeth glanced at the piano, an idea forming in her mind. Would you like to play a little? I'm sure your mother would love to know you're still practicing. The boy's eyes lit up, but John's face grew serious again. Do you think we'll ever find her? The weight of Sarah's diary in Elizabeth's purse felt heavier. She longed to tell them the truth, that Sarah was alive and that they had found her. But she couldn't raise their hopes until she was certain her daughter would awaken. I think your mother never really left you, she answered carefully. She lives in every piece of music you play, in every moment you take care of each other. The boys smiled, the same smile that reminded Elizabeth so sharply of Sarah. It made her heart ache with love. Come on, David, John called, returning to the piano. Let's show Grandma Elizabeth how we play Moon Song. Elizabeth froze. It was the first time they called her Grandma. The tears she had held back all morning finally began to flow. As the first familiar chords filled the room, Elizabeth closed her eyes. In her mind, she overlaid 3 images: Sarah as a small child playing for the first time, Sarah as a teen teaching her own students, and now John and David, keeping the family's musical legacy alive despite all they had endured. At the hospital, connected to her monitors, Sarah also listened to music, a gentle melody the nurse had turned on. And in her deep sleep, perhaps she dreamed of her boys, of a piano, of all the lullabies she still had to share. Elizabeth spent the entire night rehearsing in her mind how she would tell the boys about Sarah. Breakfast in the mansion dining room was quiet, interrupted only by the soft clinking of cutlery and occasional whispers between the brothers. John, ever observant, noticed something was different. Elizabeth had barely touched her cup of tea. Boys, she finally began, her voice gentle yet steady. We found your mother. Time seemed to freeze. David dropped the spoon he was holding, and the metallic sound echoed in the dining room. John went completely still, his green eyes, just like Sarah's, locked on Elizabeth. She's... John couldn't finish the sentence, his small hand automatically searching for David's. She's alive, Elizabeth hurried to say, but she's sleeping, a very deep sleep, ever since the fire. Like Sleeping Beauty? David asked in a trembling voice. Elizabeth felt her heart clench. How could she explain a coma to children this young? Something like that, sweetheart. The doctors are taking very good care of her and... She hesitated. They want you to visit her today. John frowned, the same way Sarah did when processing something complex. Will she wake up if she sees us? We don't know exactly when she'll wake up, Elizabeth answered honestly, but the doctors say she responds to music. And you two are the best musicians I know. The brothers exchanged another of their silent looks. David spoke first. Can we take some sheet music? The ones you saved from Mom's diary? Elizabeth smiled, touched. The night before, she had shown them some of the partially burned sheet music found with Sarah, including an original composition titled Song for My Boys, a simple yet beautiful piece Sarah had written especially for them. An hour later, they were all in the car heading to the hospital. The boys wore their best clothes, the same ones they had worn for their first dinner at the mansion. John held the folder of sheet music carefully, while David clutched a small teddy bear Elizabeth had discovered once belonged to Sarah as a child. Dr. James awaited them at the 6th floor entrance, having been briefed on how to handle the children. His kindly smile helped ease the tension of the moment. Your mum is in a very special room, he explained, kneeling to their height. There are a lot of machines to take care of her, but don't be scared. They're like the different instruments in an orchestra. John nodded seriously, while David moved closer to Elizabeth, gripping her hand tightly. And one more thing, the doctor continued brightly. We have a little rec room down the hall with a piano. Maybe you'd like to play something for her afterward. The boys' eyes lit up. Music was always their strongest connection to Sarah. It was natural they would use it to guide her back. Entering room 612, there was absolute silence for several seconds. Sarah lay there, appearing to sleep peacefully, her serene face framed by short hair. The scars from the fire, visible on her neck and left arm, had healed reasonably well. David was the first to approach, his small steps hesitant as he moved to the bedside. "Mum," he whispered, voice shaking, "I brought your teddy bear. Grandma Elizabeth kept it safe for you all this time." John stood near the door, eyes fixed on his mother, hands gripping the folder of sheet music so tightly his knuckles were white. Elizabeth gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can go to her." As though a spell was broken, John strode across the room to the bed. Carefully, he touched Sarah's hand, the one with the same birthmark as his. "Mum," he said firmly, though his eyes glistened with tears, "I kept practicing all the music you taught me. I do it every day, even with no real piano around. David does too. We never forgot." The monitors showed a slight change in Sarah's vital signs. Dr. James Cheems, watching quietly by the door, made a note on his clipboard. "How about we head to the rec room?" he suggested after a few minutes. "There's a piano waiting for you." The small room was cozy, with large windows letting in natural light. A well-maintained upright piano stood against the wall. John reverently opened his folder of sheet music, placing "Song for My Boys" on the piano stand. David took his place beside him, ready to turn pages like he used to for their mom. The first notes filled the room, a sweet, simple melody, yet loaded with emotion. Elizabeth recognized elements of Moon Song woven into a new harmony, creating something original and deeply personal. Back in room 612, the monitors began showing more significant changes. A nurse called Dr. James over, pointing to the data on her tablet. "Incredible," he murmured, watching the numbers. "Her brain activity is spiking." The music continued, John playing with impressive focus for a 6-year-old. By his side, David softly sang the lyrics Sarah had written. "My little rays of sunshine, shining in my song, every note, every sound comes straight from the heart." Elizabeth watched from the door, tears flowing quietly down her cheeks. The scene mirrored her memories of Sarah at that age, the same posture at the piano, the same focused expression, the same love for music. When the piece ended, a respectful hush filled the space. It was broken by the sound of hurried footsteps. A nurse came to fetch Dr. James urgently. "Her vital sign, there's a significant change," she explained quickly. They all rushed back to room 612. Sarah remained still, but the monitors showed readings very different from before. And then, to everyone's astonishment, a single tear rolled down her cheek. "Mom's crying!" David exclaimed, running to the bed. "Can she hear us?" John asked the doctor, his voice a blend of hope and worry. "Yes," Dr. James answered honestly. "Somehow she can hear you. She's responding to your music." Elizabeth watched as Sarah's right hand twitched slightly, like she was playing invisible piano keys. It was the first voluntary movement she had shown since the fire. "I think she wants to play with you," Elizabeth suggested gently. John nodded, determined. "Can we play here in her room?" "Bring the piano closer." Dr. James quickly consulted his team. Within minutes, they carefully wheeled the upright piano to the doorway of room 612, positioning it so Sarah could hear perfectly. The boys played for hours, every piece they remembered, every song they had learned from their mother. With each new melody, the monitors recorded different reactions. Sometimes Sarah shed more tears, sometimes her fingers moved in rhythm. By sunset, Dr. James finally suggested it was time to go. "You can come back tomorrow," he promised, when he saw the resistance in the boy's eyes. "Your mother needs to rest, and so do you." "But what if she wakes up and we're not here?" David asked, worried. "Then she'll find all these lovely pieces you left behind," Elizabeth answered, showing how they decorated the room with the sheet music. "And she'll know you were here." that you never stopped thinking about her. John approached the bed one last time. "We'll be back tomorrow, Mom," he promised solemnly. "And I'll practice more on song for my boys. There were a few notes I still didn't play perfectly." Elizabeth smiled through tears. It was exactly the sort of thing Sarah would have said. On the drive home, the boys fell asleep in the car, emotionally and physically exhausted. Elizabeth watched them in the rearview mirror, their small faces finally at peace. It had been an intense day, full of emotion but also full of hope. In her hospital room, Sarah remained in her deep sleep. But something had changed. Her monitors showed more active patterns, and on her bedside table, lit by the soft glow of the early evening, the teddy bear David had brought stood guard, patiently waiting for the moment its owner would finally awaken. The music had built a bridge over the chasm of the coma, reconnecting a mother and her children. Now it was only a matter of time before Sarah found her way back across that bridge, guided by the melodies her boys had so lovingly kept alive in their hearts. Morning came differently that day. Elizabeth sensed it as she drew open her bedroom curtains in the mansion. The sky was such a bright, vivid blue that it almost didn't seem real. The roses in the garden, her favorite, and Sarah's as well, were particularly radiant, as though they had chosen that specific day to display their full glory. As she got ready for yet another hospital visit, her thoughts drifted to a similar morning nearly 30 years before. Sarah, then 6 years old, had woken earlier than usual, eager to show her mother a new piece she had taught herself on the piano. "Mom, Mom," the childish voice of Sarah echoed in her memory. "I figured out how to play Grandma's music box tune." Elizabeth smiled at the recollection, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Her little Sarah, always so determined, so in love with music. How had they let pride and unfulfilled expectations create such a deep divide? A gentle piano sound from downstairs pulled her back to the present. John and David were already awake, practicing their newest composition. They'd named it Awakening, a title that now felt almost prophetic. In the kitchen, Susan was preparing breakfast with particular care. The housekeeper had been especially quiet since Sarah was found, as though carrying some invisible burden. Elizabeth noticed that she had made pancakes with strawberry syrup, Sarah's childhood favorite breakfast. "The boys barely slept," Susan commented softly, setting a steaming cup of tea before Elizabeth. "They were up practicing until late." "Just like her," Elizabeth replied, voice quivering with emotion. Sarah, too, would lose sleep when excited about a new song. The piano music continued, the simple yet deeply emotive melody filling the mansion. Elizabeth closed her eyes, letting another memory surface. Sarah at John's current age, sitting at the piano, her small hands dancing over the keys while Elizabeth watched with pride. "You should eat something," Susan insisted gently, placing a plate of pancakes in front of her. "It's going to be an important day." Elizabeth nodded, forcing herself to take a few bites. Her stomach was in knots, a mix of anxiety and hope, making her heart race unevenly. It had been a week since Sarah was found, and every day brought stronger signs she was close to awakening. At 9 o'clock sharp, the family headed to the hospital. The boys chatted excitedly in the back seat about which pieces they would play today. Elizabeth drove in silence, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. "Grandma," David called to her from the rearview mirror, "do you think Mom will like our new song today?" "I'm sure she will, sweetheart," Elizabeth replied, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Your mother has always loved original compositions." Another memory surfaced, Sarah at 15, showing Elizabeth her first self-composed piece. Elizabeth had insisted she focus on the classics, that composing could wait. What a mistake. What a waste of precious time. Central Hospital was unusually busy that morning. As they rode the elevator to the 6th floor, Elizabeth sensed a different kind of energy in the air. Dr. James met them in the hallway with a subdued smile. "This morning's tests were very promising," he informed them as they walked toward the room. "Her brain activity is more intense than ever." Room 612 had changed over the past few weeks. Its once white, impersonal walls were now adorned with David's colorful drawings. John's carefully arranged sheet music decorated the side table, and the piano, that gift of fate, occupied an honored spot near the window. Sarah looked like she was sleeping peacefully, her short hair framing her face like a dark halo against the white pillow. The scars from the fire, still visible on her neck and left arm, were the only physical reminders of the tragedy that nearly tore this family apart. "Good morning, Mum," John greeted, as he always did. "We brought a surprise today." David ran to place his latest drawing on the wall, a picture of the whole family gathered around the mansion's piano. "You look so pretty in this drawing," he explained proudly, playing with us and Grandma Elizabeth smiling. Elizabeth stood a few steps behind, heart overflowing with love and longing. How had Sarah managed, all on her own, to raise such sweet, talented children who loved music? "We wrote a special song," John announced, seating himself at the piano. "It's the first time we've composed, just like you used to do." The opening notes of Awakening filled the air. It was surprisingly mature for such young composers. Woven into the piece were elements of Moon Song, taught by Elizabeth to Sarah, along with melodies Sarah herself had written for the boys. But there was something new too, something deeply moving. Halfway through, Elizabeth noticed the first change. Sarah's fingers, previously still, began to move faintly, almost as if she were playing along. Her eyes, closed for so long, fluttered beneath her eyelids. "Dr. James!" Elizabeth called in an urgent whisper. The doctor hurried over, studying the monitors with professional focus. Sarah's vital signs showed dramatic fluctuations. Her brain was responding to the music in an unprecedented way. John kept playing, fully absorbed in the piece, but David noticed the movement. "Mom," he called softly, moving closer to the bed. Then it happened, slowly, like a sunrise. Sarah's eyes began to open. First just a sliver, blinking at the morning light. Then more, until her green eyes, identical to John's, were fully open. For a moment that felt eternal. She simply blinked, her gaze unfocused, drifting around the room without truly seeing. The music continued, an anchor guiding her back to consciousness. "John." Her voice was just a rough whisper, but for Elizabeth it sounded like a choir of angels. The music stopped abruptly. John spun around on the piano bench, eyes wide as he stared at his mother. "Mom," he called, his voice trembling. "My boys," Sarah murmured, tears welling in her eyes. "My precious little ones." It was as though a dam burst. David was already by the bed, sobbing openly. John joined him in seconds, both boys hesitating to touch their mother as if afraid she might vanish. "It's okay," Sarah whispered, raising her hand with effort to touch David's face. "Mom is here. Mom will never leave you again." Elizabeth remained a few steps back, tears streaming down her face. 10 years of separation seemed both an eternity and a mere blink. Her mind was flooded with memories. Sarah as a baby in her arms, Sarah as a child at the piano, Sarah as a teen composing her first pieces, Sarah at 22 walking out the door after that terrible fight. Then Sarah saw her. "Mom," she called, voice heavy with emotion. "Is that really you?" Elizabeth took a slow step forward, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would explode. Each step spanned a decade of regrets, each heartbeat a word unsaid, a hug not given, an "I love you" choked by pride. "Yes, my daughter," she said gently. "It's me." Sarah reached out her free hand. The other was still wrapped around the boys toward her mother. "Forgive me," she whispered, the words carrying 10 years of guilt and longing. "Please, Mom, forgive me." Elizabeth took her daughter's offered hand, kissing it with all the love she had saved up over a decade. "There's nothing to forgive," she replied, voice shaking. "Our pride blinded us, both of us. I'm asking for your forgiveness too, my child, for not understanding your dreams, for trying to shape you into my expectations." "I wanted so badly to come back," Sarah sobbed. "So many times I thought about calling, just showing up, but each passing year made it harder." "I never stopped looking for you," Elizabeth said softly. "Every music conservatory, every piano school. I never gave up." "I know," Sarah smiled sadly. "I saw you a few times from afar, at benefit concerts. I was so proud of the work you started with underprivileged children. It was exactly what I always wanted to do." The boys watched the exchange in respectful silence, still clinging to their mother as though afraid she might disappear again. You took such good care of them, Sarah went on, gazing lovingly at her sons. How did you know? How did you find them? It was fate, Elizabeth replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. Or maybe music. They found me one rainy night. As Elizabeth told the story of their meeting in the emergency stairwell, Sarah listened with tear-filled eyes, occasionally hugging her children tighter, as though to compensate for every lost moment. John has your mark, Elizabeth said softly, touching her grandson's wrist where the tiny half-moon stood out. That's how I knew. Sarah smiled, a smile that mirrored David's. The moon's smile, she murmured, like you always called it. Dr. James cleared his throat gently, reminding them of his presence. I'm sorry, he said kindly, but we do need to run some tests now, and Mrs. Miller needs a bit of rest. No, David objected immediately, gripping his mother more tightly. We just found her. It's okay, sweetheart, Sarah soothed, kissing his forehead. Mum just needs to do a few exams so I can go home with you soon. I promise I'm not going anywhere. Home, Elizabeth repeated softly, all of us together. While the doctors began their assessments, the family waited in a nearby visitors' lounge. The boys talked non-stop, telling Elizabeth all the things they wanted to show their mum, their room in the mansion, the rose garden, and especially the grand piano in the music room. When they were finally allowed back in, they found Sarah looking more alert, now sitting upright with the help of pillows. Her cheeks were flushed, and her eyes sparkled with a life she hadn't shown in ages. The tests are surprisingly good, Dr. James said. Of course, there's a long rehabilitation process ahead, but, he smiled, it seems music really did work miracles. It was my boy's music, Sarah said softly. I could hear it, even in the darkest place. It was like a light guiding me back. The hours that followed were filled with conversation, music, and many tears, of joy, relief, and regained love. When the sun began to set, painting the room in golden hues, Dr. James gently suggested that Sarah needed some rest. Can we play one more song before we go? John asked. Just one? Sarah smiled, a smile Elizabeth had missed for so long. Of course, my love. Would you help me get to the piano, Mom? With care, Elizabeth and Dr. James supported Sarah to sit at the piano, the boys settling beside her on the bench. Although weakened from inactivity, her fingers found the keys naturally. The first notes of Moon Song filled the room, the piece Elizabeth had taught Sarah, which Sarah had then taught the boys, and which they all now played together, 4 generations of musical love finally reunited. Outside, the first star of the evening twinkled in the darkening sky. Inside room 612, a family broken by time and pride finally began to heal, note by note, hug by hug, tear by tear. Sarah's return was not just a physical awakening, it was the awakening of a new chance, a new life in which music would not drive them apart, but act as the bridge keeping them united forever. Ever since Sarah's return, the mansion had come alive with a renewed spirit. The sound of the piano, now constant, echoed through the halls as the permanent soundtrack of a happiness rediscovered. Elizabeth had converted the old music room into a small rehabilitation area, fully equipped for her daughter's recovery. On that particular afternoon, autumn's golden light filtered through the windows while John and David played for Sarah. Her recovery was advancing well. Doctors largely credited it to the music and the boys' love. Elizabeth observed from the doorway, her heart brimming with gratitude. When she noticed the absence of the traditional afternoon tea, a ritual Susan never forgot. I'll go look for Susan, she said softly, not wanting to disturb the musical moment. Rounding the corner, she spotted something unusual. In a darker nook of the hallway, partly hidden by an old tapestry, Susan stood silently, watching the scene in the music room. There was something unsettling in the way she lingered in the shadows, as if she'd done so many times before. Susan, Elizabeth called. The housekeeper startled violently, dropping a small notebook she was carrying. As she stooped to retrieve it, several photographs spilled onto the hallway floor. Elizabeth picked up one before Susan could stop her. Her heart nearly stopped. It showed John, obviously younger, maybe 4 years old, sitting at a piano in a place Elizabeth didn't recognize. Another photo showed baby David in Sarah's arms. "I'm sorry," Susan whispered, trying to collect the photos with trembling hands. "I can explain." But Elizabeth was already gathering more pictures. Each image felt like a stab to her heart, precious moments in her daughter's and grandson's lives she had never known, yet Susan seemed to have documented them all. "My room," the housekeeper said quietly, noticing other staff members passing by in the hallway. "Please." Susan's quarters at the back of the mansion were simple yet cozy, much like the woman herself. In one corner, partially hidden under the bed, stood a large carved wooden chest. Elizabeth recognized it. It had been a gift she'd given Susan on her 20th work anniversary. "Show me," she demanded, her voice unsteady. With trembling hands, Susan opened the chest. It was like opening a decade-old time capsule, dozens of photos carefully sorted by date, yellowed recital programs, small objects like locks of the boy's hair kept in envelopes labeled with dates. "You knew," Elizabeth whispered, realization hitting like a lightning bolt. "All this time you knew where she was." Susan sank into a chair, silent tears streaming down her worn face. "Yes," she confessed. "From the start." "Why?" Elizabeth asked, voice thick with emotion. "Why didn't you tell me?" "In the beginning," Susan began, lifting one of the oldest photos, Sarah pregnant with John, "she made me promise not to. She was so hurt, so set on proving she could manage on her own. I tried to convince her to return, but you know your daughter. That pride. So you decided to keep it a secret," Elizabeth finished, the hurt plain in her voice. "It wasn't an easy decision," Susan said gently, "but I realized I could help her better that way. I took her money when I could, took pictures of the boys so one day," her voice faltered, "one day you could see every moment you missed." From the music room downstairs came the notes of Moon Song, now played with 4 hands by John and Sarah. David's laughter occasionally joined the melody. "That sound," Susan murmured, closing her eyes. "I spent years watching from afar, holding on to every note, every smile. Sarah taught at a small music conservatory not far from here. I attended her performances, sat at the back." Elizabeth picked up one of the recital programs. "St. Cecilia Music Conservatory," she read, her heart clenching. "I searched every conservatory in the city except the one just a few blocks away," Susan finished. "Sometimes the most obvious is the hardest to see." With careful reverence, Susan opened a particularly well-kept album. "This one is special," she said. "All the first moments, John's first tooth, David's first steps, their first recital." Elizabeth turned the pages with trembling hands. Her daughter and grandsons grew before her eyes in these pictures, precious, irreplaceable moments she had missed, but which Susan had preserved. "Did she ask about me?" Elizabeth managed to say after a while. "Always," Susan replied softly. "She kept every newspaper clipping about your work with underprivileged children. She was especially proud when you opened the foundation." "The fire," Elizabeth interrupted abruptly. "Did you know about the recital that night?" Susan's face went visibly pale. I had gone to watch the boys perform. I was in the audience when—" Her voice failed, and Elizabeth noticed her trembling hands growing worse. "Susan," she said, an edge in her voice, "what else do you know about that night?" Before the housekeeper could respond, footsteps sounded in the hallway. Sarah, leaning on a cane, appeared at the door. "I thought I'd find you both here," she said gently. Susan stood abruptly, but Sarah raised a hand, signaling her not to leave. "It's time, Susan," she said kindly. "Time to tell everything." Elizabeth watched the exchange between her daughter and the housekeeper. There was something there, an understanding deeper than what she knew. "The boys?" Susan asked tentatively. "They're with the piano teacher," Sarah answered. "We have time." Carefully, Sarah sat down on Susan's small bed. Her gaze drifted to the chest of memories, a sad smile crossing her lips. "So you kept everything," she murmured, picking up a photo of the boys playing in a park. "Every moment." "It was the least I could do," Susan said, her voice breaking. After what?" Elizabeth interrupted, tension in her voice. Sarah took her mother's hand. "Mom, please sit. It's a long story, and not all of it is easy to hear." Elizabeth sat down, her heart racing. Downstairs, the piano notes played on, seemingly oblivious to the drama unfolding in the small back room. Susan took a deep breath and retrieved one last envelope from the chest. This one, Elizabeth noticed, appeared older and was partially singed. "It all begins with a letter," Susan said softly. "A letter you wrote to Sarah the day she left, but it was never delivered." The piano music below now seemed distant, as if coming from another world. In the modest back room, three women bound by love, secrets, and guilt prepared to reveal truths kept hidden for a decade. And outside, the autumn sun began its descent, casting ever-lengthening shadows across the mansion windows, shadows that, like Susan's secrets, were finally about to be illuminated. Autumn wore on, painting the mansion's garden in gold and crimson tones. Sarah, now able to walk longer distances with the help of her cane, had taken up the habit of having breakfast on the veranda, watching the boys play among the fallen leaves before their lessons. Elizabeth, carrying a steaming cup of tea, paused for a moment to watch her daughter. Sarah seemed different, changed not just physically but with a serenity she hadn't possessed 10 years ago. Though her eyes still bore traces of the trauma, they shone with a wisdom gained through hardship. "They've never had a yard like this," Sarah said softly, noticing her mother's presence. "Our old apartment barely had room for a few potted plants in the window." Elizabeth sat beside her, watching John teach David how to make a neat pile of leaves. Even while playing, the older boy maintained his protective watch over his younger brother. "You did a remarkable job with them," Elizabeth said, her voice trembling with pride. "They're amazing boys." Sarah smiled, that same bright smile David had inherited. "Sometimes I wonder how I managed. I was so young, they were even younger. But music always kept us together, gave us purpose." As if to confirm her words, the boys began to sing one of Sarah's compositions while they played, a tune she'd turned into their playful sing-along. "Remember when you were John's age?" Elizabeth asked, diving into memories. "You used to turn everything into music, too." "I do," Sarah chuckled gently. "You were torn between encouraging me and worrying I'd never properly learn classical pieces." A moment of silence followed, the weight of lost years settling between them. "Forgive me for that," Elizabeth said at last, "for trying to shape your talent into my expectations, instead of letting it blossom naturally like you did with the boys." Sarah took her mother's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "There's nothing left to forgive, Mom. Time has taught us so much. Look at what you've built with your foundation. How many children you've introduced to music. In the end, we took different roads to end up in the same place." Inside the mansion, the piano sounded again. Their private teacher had arrived for the boys' lesson. The melody of Moon Song, now in a four-hand arrangement by the brothers, made both women smile. "They're inseparable," Sarah said, noticing how the boys had dropped their leafy game at the first call from the teacher. Their time on the streets. It was awful to think of them alone, but somehow it only strengthened their bond. Elizabeth felt her heart twist. "They told me how John sang to David every night so he could sleep. Music was always our safe haven," Sarah said, tears glistening in her eyes. "Even without a real piano, even in the hardest moments, that we always had our songs." The morning passed quietly, the autumn sun warming the veranda as mother and daughter exchanged stories. Sarah speaking of the boys' first steps, their first piano notes, their performances at the conservatory. Elizabeth, in turn, recounted how she'd channeled her grief into something good, creating opportunities for children who, like her grandsons, might never otherwise have access to music. After lunch, it was time for Sarah's physical therapy. The exercises were grueling, but she never complained. Her determination to fully recover was evident with each movement, each minor victory. "I want to be able to play properly with my children," she explained to the physical therapist when he suggested a break. "Not just a few simple notes." Watching the session, Elizabeth recognized in Sarah the same iron will she had seen in John during those bleak days on the streets, a refusal to surrender, to let circumstances win. In the afternoon, after lessons and therapy, the family gathered in the music room. It was their favorite time of day, when all obligations were set aside and only music mattered. "Mom," John called from the piano bench, "do you remember that variation of Moon Song you were composing before the fire?" Sarah, resting in a special armchair near the piano, nodded. "I never got around to finishing it." "Maybe," David suggested shyly, "we can finish it together." Sarah's smile lit up the whole room. "Come here," she said, opening her arms for her sons. Elizabeth watched from the doorway as mother and sons clustered around the piano, discussing harmonies and melodies like true composers. Sarah had a special way of teaching, never imposing, always guiding, letting each child find his own musical voice. "Grandma," David suddenly called, "come help us too. You know Moon Song better than any of us." Heart filled with love, Elizabeth joined her family at the piano. Together, they began weaving a new version of the piece that had traveled through generations, now enriched by elements of everyone's individual journeys. During dinner, the boys couldn't stop talking about the new composition. Their eyes shone with excitement as they debated possible arrangements. "Has it always been like this?" Elizabeth asked Sarah quietly, watching her grandson's enthusiasm. "Yes," Sarah answered with a smile. "Music wasn't just something we did. It was our language, how we expressed ourselves, how we connected." Later, after the boys had gone to bed, Sarah asked to go out to the garden. The night was clear, and a soft breeze carried the scent of the last autumn roses. "You know," she said, looking at the stars, "for a long time I thought I'd failed as a mother because I couldn't provide them a more comfortable life. But seeing them now, I realize maybe I did something right. They're kind, talented, and they love music with all their hearts, not out of obligation, but from genuine passion." Elizabeth slipped an arm around her daughter's shoulders. "You're an amazing mother, Sarah. And now we have a second chance," Sarah finished. "All of us." From upstairs, the soft sound of the piano reached the garden. John and David, even after being tucked in, still practiced quietly in their room. "Some things never change," Sarah laughed gently. "I used to do the same thing, play after bedtime." "And I pretended not to hear," Elizabeth added, laughing too. The wind rustled the leaves, creating a natural melody that blended with the piano notes. Mother and daughter stood there, embraced under the starry sky, each lost in her own thoughts, yet finally at peace with each other. Healing was happening not just in Sarah's body, but in all their hearts. Through music, through the small moments they shared, through the laughter of the boys echoing in the mansion corridors, old wounds were closing, replaced by something new and precious. And upstairs, John and David continued their nightly song, their notes weaving a cloak of love and hope over the Smith mansion, a place that now, at last, felt like a true home for everyone. Spring arrived in all its splendor, bringing with it a sense of renewal. St. Cecilia Music Conservatory, rebuilt and expanded with support from the Smith Foundation and donors inspired by Sarah and her children's story, now glowed under the afternoon sun. Its walls, once marred by the fire, were decorated with colorful murals painted by children in the community program. It was the grand reopening day, marked by a special benefit concert. In a makeshift backstage area, Sarah straightened David's bow tie while John warmed up with scales on an upright piano. "Nervous?" she asked gently, recognizing in them the same excited energy she herself felt before important performances. "A little," David admitted, his sweet smile lighting up his face. "But it's different this time. We're all together." John paused his playing to look at his family. "Besides," he added with surprising maturity for a 7-year-old, "we can help other kids who are like we used to be." Sarah felt her heart flood with pride. Her boys, who had been through so much, had come out not just stronger but filled with extraordinary compassion for others. Elizabeth entered backstage, radiant in her midnight blue dress. "The auditorium is packed," she announced, "and guess who just arrived? All the kids from the new shelter. The Hope Wing, as they had named the new section of the conservatory dedicated to vulnerable children, already housed 15 full-time students. More than just a music school, it was a safe haven where kids could dream, create, and heal through art. "Time to get ready," Sarah said, standing gracefully. Months of physical therapy had nearly restored her full range of motion, though her left arm still ached on cold nights. The concert program had been carefully planned. It began with performances by the conservatory's regular students, followed by special numbers from the Hope Wing kids. The grand finale was a performance by the Smith family, 3 generations united by music and love. From the wings, Sarah watched proudly as her students performed. Each child had a unique story, a personal journey that led them there. As John once said, "Music reminds us we're not alone." When it was time for the Hope Wing students, the auditorium fell silent. A girl of about 6, rescued from the streets just like John and David had been, played a simplified version of Moon Song. Her small hands trembled at first, but grew steadier when David, from the wings, started humming along to encourage her. "You taught them well," Elizabeth whispered to Sarah, noting their interaction. "Not just music, but kindness." Finally, it was time for the main presentation. The grand piano at center stage gleamed under the spotlights, as if eager for what was about to happen. Sarah entered first, met with warm applause. Many in the audience knew her story, the young teacher who had turned tragedy into hope, who used her experiences to create something bigger than herself. John and David followed, each taking their place beside her on the piano bench. The piece they had chosen was special, an original composition titled Dawn Symphony, interweaving elements of Moon Song with melodies composed during their journey to reconciliation. The first notes filled the auditorium. Sarah led the main melody while the boys added harmonies, creating a rich tapestry of sound brimming with emotion and meaning. One could sense echoes of their story. Moments of pain transformed into beauty, separation turned into reunion, fear replaced by hope. Midway through the performance, Elizabeth joined them on stage, adding her own voice to the family symphony. They hadn't rehearsed that part, it was a surprise Sarah and the boys had prepared. The audience watched, moved, as 4 generations of musical love converged in perfect harmony. When the final note resonated, there was a moment of reverent silence before the hall erupted in applause. Many people openly wept, touched not only by the music but by the symbolism of that moment. At the reception afterward, Sarah watched with satisfaction as John and David interacted with the children from the Hope Wing. Her sons had a natural gift for reaching out to kids who, like them, once believed hope was lost. "They're naturals," Elizabeth said, coming up beside her daughter. "They have your way of teaching, gentle but firm." Sarah smiled, observing John show a little student how to position her hands correctly on the piano. "They understand," she said softly. "They know sometimes all a child needs is someone to believe in them." The conservatory looked almost unrecognizable compared to the building where the fire had taken place. The new facilities included not only classrooms and practice rooms, but also gathering spaces, a small musical library, and most importantly, dormitories for children who needed a safe place to stay. "You know what John told me yesterday?" Sarah said, watching David teach a simple melody to a group of younger kids. "He said sometimes we need to get lost to find our true path." Elizabeth felt tears well up. "Such wisdom for someone so young," she murmured. "As you always said," Sarah smiled, "music isn't about hitting the right notes. It's about playing with heart." The sun began to set, painting the auditorium gold through its stained glass windows. The Hope Wing children spontaneously gathered around the piano, and soon a new song emerged, improvised, imperfect, yet overflowing with joy and possibility. John and David joined in naturally, their voices blending with the others in a pure celebration of sound and life. Sarah watched, heart brimming with love and gratitude. Say, of all the music she had ever composed or played, this might be the most beautiful. A symphony of hope reborn, love rediscovered, and a reunited family. "Classes start in full tomorrow," she told Elizabeth. "We already have a remarkable waiting list for the Hope Wing. Then we'll expand," Elizabeth replied firmly. "Every child deserves a chance to find their music." As night gently fell over the conservatory, the music continued. On the stage, children who just months ago had nothing but dreams now created melodies of hope. Among them, John and David shone, not as the grandsons of the renowned philanthropist Elizabeth Smith, but as two boys who had transformed their own pain into something beautiful and meaningful. And Sarah, watching with eyes brimming with tears, knew they had found not just a happy ending, but a new beginning. One that promised music, love, and hope not just for her family, but for every child who, like her sons, needed only one chance for their music to shine. The legacy of St. Cecilia Music Conservatory was just beginning, but its notes already echoed with the promise of transformed futures, realized dreams, and hearts healed through the timeless power of music.